Well, here's more now on that conference by sex workers from 10 different African countries. I'm joined by Eric Harper. He's the director of the Sex Worker Education and Advocacy Task Force. And I'm also joined by Dorothy Oguto from Kenya. Eric and Dorothy, thank you very much for joining us. This is an important conference, a great deal of material you've gotten through. Why did you see it fit? Why was it so important to have this conference now?
It's long overdue because of the human rights violations that sex workers experience throughout Africa. On the one hand, it's been an incredibly exciting event, and it's been very moving because we've had sex workers, as you said earlier on, from 10 different African countries coming to speak, and actually for the first time publicly coming out and actually saying, we are human beings, see us as human beings, and sex work is work. It's as simple as that. On the other hand, it's been a very disturbing experience because of the level of human rights violations that we've been hearing about and the extent of it and some of the very shocking things.
Well, we'll hear from Dorothy also about exactly what those experiences are, but what are you pushing for? What does this conference hope to achieve?
This conference, we're tired of situations where people speak on behalf of sex workers and we say nothing about us without us. So what was very significant about this conference was that it was in partnership with organizations committed to the human rights of sex workers as well as sex workers themselves. So it's a partnership. So we formed a partnership, we formed a network of organizations and sex workers in 10 different African countries to actually begin exposing human rights violations, document them and seek legal redress.
Now, Dorothy, you've also made the journey from Kenya to be in South Africa for this conference. You've heard stories of other sex workers from the continent, the kind of experiences that they've had. The abuses in your country is different to the kind of abuses that sex workers in South Africa have. Tell us about some of your experiences.
Well, the sex workers and the stories I have heard from sex workers here in South Africa especially is that they experience continually and constant police harassment. The cops just sweep the girls off the streets, demand bribes, demand sex, or sometimes even rape them. But in Kenya, it's opposite of all that. It's harassment from the clients. There's particularly, and this is a very sad case, and this was a very close friend of mine and also a sex worker who was actually forced to have sex with a dog. That is the worst form of sexual violation that I have ever come across, and sadly the girl died last year.
We heard also of stories of sex workers in Malawi, for example, who've been beheaded, in other countries where they've had foreign objects forced into their private parts and they've died as a result of that. Your voice has been heard at this conference for somebody who works out there and is at the mercy of all kinds of things. What were you hoping to get out of it, and do you feel like you have made some progress?
Yes, I do feel we have made some kind of progress in terms of being just the fact that we were all there and everyone had a voice. Many a times we have professors and all this kind of diplomats talking on our behalf. But this was actually a platform where we could raise our voices and they could hear our cries just from ourselves, and we could stand for ourselves and demand for these rights, and not someone else demanding for them as if we can't be some vulnerable group or something.
Why should prostitution be made legal, Dorothy?
We are fighting for decriminalisation of sex work. Decriminalisation in the sense that when community has perceived sex workers as criminals, drug addicts, drug traffickers, but simply because the act is criminalized. But there is nothing wrong with doing sex, because sex is actually an adult activity. But it is because we earn of our bodies, it is actually the immoral laws that criminalize it. But it is actually not a crime to do sex.
Well, what happens from now on, Eric Harper? You've reached the end of this conference. You've heard some harrowing stories, and of course, there are, sex is, this kind of work is taboo in many countries in Africa. Do you think that you've gone some way in changing the mindset? Has your message reached the right audience?
Well, we're very pleased that the press has given so much attention to the conference. And we're very pleased that the questions are moving beyond simply why do you do sex work? Because that's the question that everyone seems to never get beyond. We formed an alliance and we're going to start documenting human rights violations. So, and that's a great step forward. And we're going to continue to push the message of decriminalisation because, for example, with decriminalisation, it's a better way to address issues like trafficking. It's a better way to stop the criminal element exploiting sex workers. It's a better way to address health issues. There's very clear arguments as to why there should be decriminalisation. So we'll continue to push that, not just in South Africa, but other parts of Africa as well.
What has been the hardest obstacle in all of this? Has it been people's prejudice towards it? Has it been government's resistance to it? What has been the hardest element of trying to create this movement to legalise sex work?
I think the most difficult obstacle is that the debate is often approached in very simplistic terms. People don't think about sex work. They either see it as all bad or all good. So it's to actually introduce some complexity into the debate and actually really start thinking about the issues in a way which actually deals with the complex realities of the sex workers' lives, as opposed to just simplifying it.
Well, Dorothy, I'm going to end with you, and of course it's a question I didn't ask, and you pointed it out actually. Why is this the kind of work that you chose to engage in? What were the circumstances?
On a personal level?
Yes.
When I entered into the sex industry, I was orphaned and I was at a tender age. I was basically a teenager, and my older siblings were already in the industry. So it was just a basic thing to put food on the table.
Well, would you leave if there were other alternatives? Is it something that you would do voluntarily, or was it purely circumstantial?
With other opportunities presented to me, I would leave the sex industry, but I would still want to do something for the sex workers.
Champion the rights of sex workers.
Yes, and this is why I am the front sex worker runner in pushing through for the formation of this alliance and networking for sex workers all over
Well, we hope
Africa.
that your message reaches the right audience, and we certainly hope that we can make some progress in this regard. Thank you very much for your time. Eric Harper and Dorothy Oguta from Kenya.